Good evening and welcome to TDM Talk Show. Over 13 million tourists visited Macau in the first 5 months of the year, accounting for a 6% increase year on year. More than half are overnight visitors, but the extension of their length of stay remains a challenge. Beyond the facts and the figures lies tourist satisfaction. Other questions loom large regarding tourism capacity or customer service. Our guest has been conducting extensive research on these matters. Leonardo Dioko is the director of the Tourism Research Center at the Institute for Tourism Studies. Professor Leonardo Dioko, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Jose.
Is Macau truly becoming a world tourism and leisure hub?
I would say it is slowly but surely getting towards that direction.
How slow and how surely?
Yes, there's a lot of work to be done. There are many improvements that we've seen over the last few years, so it might take some more years because of the necessary changes that we have to implement over the years. A lot of these have to do with infrastructure. A lot of these have to do with the profile of visitors and also the type of attractions that visitors can enjoy in Macau. So there's a lot of improved changes in the last few years that are poised to make Macau a global center for tourism and leisure. But at the same time, progress can be slow. I think the infrastructure now being put into place will position Macau very, very much within the next few years to fully realize that potential.
You singled out, firstly, you did mention the issue of infrastructure.
Yes.
And I would say that would entail both tourism in the infrastructure in the sense of facilities, hotels, tourist attractions, I mean the hardware part of the equation. Right. What about the software part of the equation?
That's right. Any destination can build very, very shiny, brand new and modern facilities in order to absorb visitors. Dubai can do that. Hong Kong and Singapore are always on that mode, developing new infrastructure. But it's actually the quality of visitors' experience at the end of the day that will help determine whether we succeed or fail. And I think in this regard, there's quite a lot of work to be done.
You mentioned a lot of work to be done. We're getting there, but slowly. And this leads me to one of the most interesting features of your research, which regards tourism satisfaction, because their perception, their take on the experience they have here in Macau is of paramount importance, right? The latest figures with regards to their satisfaction. What can you tell us in a nutshell?
Yes, well, we released the latest tourist satisfaction figures that covers up to the end of 2016, and we continue to have more recent data, which we are constantly updating. Now, based on the latest findings, in fact, 2016 has been a very good year for Macau for all the 10 sectors that we regularly cover in the tourist satisfaction survey. However, that positive development, does not come without a lot of costs. A lot of that improvement comes from the fact that in the last 2 years prior, there have been quite some failures or very poor performance on the part of many of the different sectors that we measure.
What kind of indicators are we talking about?
Okay, so in order to measure the tourist satisfaction, we, of course, ask them an overall experience, but at the same time, we break down all of these into various sectors. There are 10 important sectors. That includes transportation, their experience with the hotels, their experience with attending events, business or festivals in Macau, for example, their experience of taking restaurants, or their experience of taking public transportation. And across all of these sectors, we've seen an improvement in 2016. But again, not all sectors are performing in the same way.
It's all has to be put in perspective and in relative terms to
Correct.
the previous
Yes,
stage, right?
correct. So as the most critical improvements that we've seen come always from the event sector. So the event sector provides us with best performance in tourist satisfaction. And we've seen this across many, many years. So in fact, the event sector in Macau perhaps is the single most important sector in terms of generating tourist satisfaction. On the other side, you have sectors that are laggards that could perform tremendously much more better.
Transportation will be one of these.
One of these,
right?
improving, but certainly a lot of areas to improve as well. Not as bad as we expected for 2016. Improvements were made in 2016, but the most critical sectors remain. I would say I would consider them still in the intensive care unit. Would be the heritage department, heritage sectors. Our heritage attractions are doing their best to dissatisfy our visitors.
That is interesting. But why is that? I mean, why are they not feeling that they're having such a worthy experience when they are visiting their heritage sites?
This is very interesting.
What's failing?
Our heritage attractions are fixed. They are a tourist experience that you can't build or increase in terms of size or in physical capacity. And therefore, the more visitors we put into our heritage attractions, the more unpleasant the experience can become. And I think we're seeing that in our data very, very strongly. Unlike, for example, transportation, unlike, for example, the airports, unlike, for example, the ferry terminals, where capacity can be increased with some planning, of course, and with proper timing. But our heritage attractions are really, really inundated with a lot of visitors. And it's very, very hard to sort of guarantee a very, very pleasant experience for our visitors whenever they come and visit our heritage sites. And it's one of the most important reasons visitors come to Macau. So I would say it's a very critical sector.
Let's delve into this, because this is, I would say, it's important, of course, and because Macau is portrayed as a city of culture, of heritage, of course, because of the World Heritage Sites, etc. But then what's really not working? Is it the fact that people feel that it's unpleasant to be in those locations packed with people, or is it the fact that there's not much else to do other than just taking a look at the site and taking some pictures and selfies, and that's it?
Well, both points are correct. So in order to have a very, very good visiting experience, number one, you have to have the proper spaces and a very, very amicable space. You don't want to be going through an attraction, a heritage attraction, fighting through so many crowds. You don't also want to have an experience that doesn't stimulate the mind or the feelings of the visitors. And that's one of the things. Now, I'm not saying that heritage attractions should be promoted like Disneyland attractions. No way should they be the same. But I think the need to make visitors feel and be satisfied cognitively from their experience of visiting the heritage sites should no less be an experience.
And the issue is, what's lacking when you're saying that they don't feel very satisfied with the experience they get when they are visiting the heritage site? Is it because the place is fully packed with people, or is it because there's not much else to do other than just taking some pictures? Are we lacking performances? Has it got to do with the tour guides?
Both points are correct, Jose. The experience of visiting heritage sites require that we have an amiable space for an experience, for a positive experience. And having a lot of people at the same time with a lot of crowding and congestion makes it a very, very terrible experience for many people, especially families. Having a very proper atmosphere is one thing, and a very important thing. But the second most important thing is, of course, generating a very positive experience. Something that doesn't just show visitors the impressive image of our heritage sites, but also to move their emotions in order to also educate them. A visit to a heritage site should not just be with our eyes, it should also be fun. It should be emotionally stirring, and it should be memorable. I think these are experiences that we are not generating to its full extent. What many visitors do at our heritage sites is they are dropped there by a tour bus or discover it on their own, and they find thousands of others also doing the same. They jostle for space in order to get a very good view and take photographs. And what they do, given the tremendous number of people around, is they would like to leave as soon as possible, which doesn't leave us with a very, very good image in the minds of the visitors. So I think the experience has to be managed much, much better. I think there is a lot of way in which the management of our heritage sites could be improved, and the experience of visitors prepared much better by not only, of course, the city officials or the cultural department, but also by the tourism industry, bringing them there at a more ideal period of time during the day, and also giving the proper preparation mentally and emotionally.
But could we tackle this by, let's say, for instance, having performances in the area surrounding the heritage site, so in a way that would divert those visitors to some other areas, and then as a result, you could have a better management?
That is one way. Of course, having shows and having different intangible attractions, such as dances, might draw away some of the people outside of the very congested areas. And I think that has been done to some limited extent, with some success, by the way. And I think that should be explored even more. We have come to the point that it is so crowded on the peak periods of visitation that we've had to channel people's paths in the heritage center, in the center of the city. So we actually corral them into going into different streets or going only in one direction. And that's how bad it becomes on the most congested period of the year.
By talking about congestion, local tourist authorities have been pushing for some sort of diversion in terms of the flows of visitors by promoting alternative routes, new routes, so we could, and visitors could come to know and get to know some other places in Macau, also with some history, but it seems that it's not working as it was.
Yes, there are walking routes that were identified. In fact, I have some colleagues in IFT who have done some preliminary studies on that as well. And I think there is a lack of awareness about these walkable routes, neighborhood routes, for example. One of the routes, for example, take visitors nearby our area here.
That's right.
But it appears that, you hardly see anybody following that route. So there is, I think, much more leeway to improve in promoting these alternative routes. Then again, it's also a matter of actually empowering the communities and residents, as well as business operators in those alternative routes, in order to create some sort of event or some special activity during the day, in order that visitors might be drawn away from the main routes and to those less visited routes. I think that strategy is in a very good direction. I think implementation requires a little bit more reinforcement, but and the empowerment, I believe, of the communities involved. Once the community in those walkable alternative walking routes are empowered or given some resources in order to create some sort of local festival, for example, or helping them to highlight some features of their local neighborhood, then I think we'll see much, much more improvement.
So involving the community would also, I would say, be a strategy to lessen the impact and also some sort of negative impact that the local communities may feel that mass tourism is having on their way of life, on their daily lives, right? What else could be done in this respect?
Well, I believe Macau has always had the potential to realize its tourism success. A lot of the planning and a lot of the implementation occurs top down, normally led by our government agencies. And that's not a bad thing. I think that's a very, very good thing. There's a lot of support from the government. But success normally doesn't come from the top down. It comes from the bottom up. It comes from empowering the communities. A lot of community residents, when you give them the chance to actually take part, they will pull in. They will come and actually contribute. What they need is, of course, time and resources, plus the galvanizing work of, for example, the Macau Government Tourist Office, who can influence them to actually create. It is not up to only the government or to its central planners to really think of Macau's attractions. Actually, the attractions already exist.
Is it something, interesting your point, is it something somehow more supply-driven or demand-driven? My point is, like, you know, if you look at the profile of the visitors, do they already have in mind, oh, yes, I want to go, of course, to the landmarks, for sure, but are they open to being surprised by something that would all of a sudden they would come across some interesting small feature, alley, whatever. What do your surveys show us?
In fact, serendipity, the opportunity to discover something unexpected is actually the best way to increase tourist satisfaction in any destination. Most of the visitors that come to Macau, or to any destination for that matter, already have a list of things. And I would say these are over-marketed list of things to visit, the must-see attractions, the must-do activities. And to some extent, you need to inform them this in order to pull them into coming to Macau at the beginning. However, what would make a memorable experience would be to discover those little details of everyday life in Macau and in any other destinations that actually would make one's experience the most memorable. If you ask many of the Macau people who go to Japan, they will tell you the most memorable experiences are eating in the local ramen noodle shops, or discovering a temple that they never knew existed from the guidebooks, or being led or encountering a local resident who helps them to find their way through the maze of the big cities or small towns in Japan.
And now, I mean, there's of course an obvious elephant in the room that we haven't mentioned, gaming for sure. Is that the main driving force behind Macau's tourism industry? For sure it is, but when you look at your surveys, when you look at the questionnaires, is that what's driving them to Macau?
Well, in addition to the tourist satisfaction study, we also conduct visitor profile studies, which is very, very important for any tourism destination. One of the questions that we always ask is, did you come primarily to gamble in Macau or to visit its casinos? And what we're finding is that majority of the visitors actually are not drawn by the casinos. You know, as much as I can remember, as only at most 26% would probably say that. The rest being much more attracted by the cuisine of Macau, shopping, as well as the heritage sites. So gaming, yes, it's a very, very crucial part of our economy and the tourism industry. But nevertheless, it's not the only experience that visitors come or that draw visitors to Macau.
So in that respect, would you say that these push to promote Macau beyond gaming, Macau's non-gaming features, is it gaining traction? Is it working? Is it yielding results?
Yes, what we're seeing is, these are very small blips in our data, Jose, but the reason for that is that a huge part of the visitors that come to Macau come, of course, from mainland China. But whenever we look at our data, we hardly see any very big changes. But once we extract from the data non-mainland Chinese visitors, then we can see some much more significant improvements. We see visitors from Korea, for example, enjoying very much the Las Vegas-style resorts and that we have here in Macau, the very, very interesting complexes of hotels and casino resorts that we have. We also have events and shows, the festivals of Macau that are actually drawing a lot of repeat visitation from, for example, from Taiwan as well as Hong Kong.
You were talking about the fact that the lion's share of our visitors, of course, it comes from mainland China. But of course, then we also have the Greater China region encompassing Hong Kong and Taiwan. What about international visitors? That's been one of the targets, to diversify the sources of tourists. Is it happening? And would it be a mixed picture or moving in the right direction?
Well, I think we're still moving in the same direction. I think you have the South Asian visitors, for example. Now, I don't like to sort of like simplify the characterization but from our data, and this is broadly speaking, of course. For example, South Asian visitors like, for example, to stay at our 5-star hotels.
They are coming from India, from Sri Lanka.
That's right. They are very much drawn to the glitter and the cosmopolitanism of Macau, very much similar to what they experience in Singapore. Southeast Asians, for example, they come and visit our heritage sites, our religious and Buddhist temples, for example. They also are very much attracted to the cuisine. More distant visitors from Europe.
Long-haul visitors.
That's the longer haul visitors, for example. A lot of them come because of they have some friends and relatives coming over, but it's also because Macau forms part of a bigger picture of their travels. For example, they combine Macau together with visiting East Asia or on their way to the United States or to Australia, for example. But it's never been a very, very big segment. But I think the more Macau becomes a global center for tourism and leisure, then we will see much, much more longer haul visitors as well.
So if you look at untapped fields to some extent, which ones would you single out?
Well, as you know, the fastest growing economies in the world are, demonstrating the best potential, of course. So there's the Indian market, the South Asian markets in general. Southeast Asia, we are actually next door to amongst the fastest growing economies. At the beginning, you asked me whether we are on track to become the global Center for Tourism and Leisure. The reason why we can say that we will reach there eventually is that we are basically just next door to amongst the economies in the world that are fastest growing in the world, biggest populations, and there's a lot of dynamism, there's a lot of movement in low-cost carriers. So I think there is some potential. The more we lessen our reliance on the dominance of the mainland Chinese market, then we can see much better pictures.
Going back to the issue of tourism satisfaction and the satisfaction of tourists, their experience is also related to, let's say, customer service. and this is also linked with human resources, etc. Have we witnessed any improvement or not necessarily? Because this has been an issue, a thorny issue, some would say, customer service. Are they satisfied?
Well, in those sectors in which human contact is very, very important, for example, the hotels have traditionally done very, very well. I think that's also because they're paid better. The restaurant sector needs a lot of improvement. I think it has swallowed in terms of service quality. We can see that from our data. And it's very, very ironic that Macau, since we are striving to become a gastronomy...
Yeah, I was going to mention
yes.
that, yes.
So, but restaurant sectors, the food and beverage experience requires a lot of improvement. So that is one area that I would consider putting into the intensive care unit of Macau's tourism services.
So we have some patients in the intensive care unit,
right.
heritage satisfaction.
That's right. That's right.
Customer service, at least partially.
That's right.
Transportation
improving, not as bad as we expected. I think 2016 was a surprise. Remember, transportation is not so much people-based because it's more of the equipment, the transportation equipment. And do note, Jose, that a lot of our visitors use the extensive network of shuttle buses. So that hasn't done so poorly in the past. There has been some years and quarters in which it didn't do very well. But there's, despite the changes that they did some years back in consolidating some of the routes of the shuttle buses, in fact, that has become a little bit of a good thing. The other patient that I would consider putting, and I think it's in the intensive care unit, would be the tour operators and the tour guides. I think from what we see in our data, that I would intensify the care and attention for this sector.
But what sort of intervention can we have here? I mean, if you would the doctors be looking at this patient, and is there a need for surgery? I mean, what can be done to?
Well, yes. Well, I think
bring about some huge improvement.
That's right. As you know, in Macau, there's a laissez-faire attitude to this. I think there's enough concern from all sectors. I do believe there's much more intervention that can be done. There is always the need for better quality training and qualification, and much more preparation on the part of tour operators and tour agencies in order to improve the experience that they are delivering. They shouldn't just be treating many of our package tour visitors, for example, as sheep. That they would just bus them in here, bus them in over there, and expect that they would have a very good experience. I think we should go away from that model completely. On the other hand, yes, you do mention some important things. There's the issue of better compensation, or the manner of compensation. But unless the industry and the associations that are very, very much involved in this aspect really start changing and rethinking the way they operate, I'm afraid we won't see any improvements. So there has to be, I think, much more discussion. Probably, I don't think we should be waiting for the next negative incident to occur. And that it appears in the news. And then we start intervening. I think we should revisit very much the quality of service delivered by the restaurant sector, the tour operators and the travel guides, the tour guides, and of course the experience at the heritage sites.
One last question regards planning and integrating, and we do know that there is an ongoing discussion on a sort of master plan for the tourism industry. What about integrating it into other plans which are being drafted? encompassing tourism with other sectors, of course, the overall urban planning approach, but some other policies which would have to be integrated. Your final word on this?
Well, as you know, the Macau Government Tourist Office initiated the Tourism Master Plan for a couple of years now. I do believe they're about ready to announce most of the findings and the results of that. They actively invited us to take part in actually crafting some of the major points in the Tourism Master Plan, and we are very much honored to do so. I think there has to be much better integration. The right hand can't just improve itself without telling the other left hand to do the same. Otherwise, we would all be imbalanced. So there's a lot of things going on at the urban planning department. There's a lot of land area being developed as we speak. There are talks of infrastructure being put, namely, of course, the light rail system, as well as a possibility of another tunnel linking the new areas with the Cotai area, for example.
Transportation will take time to tackle all these issues. It is a conundrum, right?
Exactly. And hence, the slow but sure approach towards becoming a global tourism center. Yes, there is, because a lot of these issues involve the entire city on a macro level. These are, of course, urban planning issues, infrastructure issues, and they impact as well some other non-hard factors, such as labor issues as well. Then I think the whole process will take time. I think the Tourism Master Plan is probably the closest we have to be able to integrate all of these. I think some of the discussions, especially the consultative sessions that were conducted in preparation for the Tourism Master Plan, were in this direction, and rightly so, I believe. And I think they've done a good job in that aspect, in that particular aspect. And so I think there is a recognition that, yes, it's about time that all of these issues come together as one. And but remember, Jose, there's no God there's no single God in terms of planning the tourism of any destination. What we do need is not a God, but a very good conductor, someone to ensure that all the relevant parties are notified and involved in the process if there are problems, and also in planning the fix for such problems.
You're talking about conductor, and I would assume that that conductor would have to have a holistic approach to the whole development of tourism, urban planning, transportation, etc. And now this leads me to, this is the very last question, in full circle, coming back to the issue of becoming a world tourism and leisure hub. Do we have the human software that it takes to attain that goal? This boils down to the question of shortage of human resources and the need to import manpower. What's your take on this?
In terms of training and qualifications, and in providing the necessary facilities for improving the delivery of services, Macau and both the private sector, the training sectors, the education sector, I think we are up there amongst the world's best. The problem lies in the social conditions of the need, for example, for imported workers. For Macau's population in itself cannot satisfy the vision that we have of becoming a global tourism, a global center for tourism and leisure. So we need to actually rethink as well the need to open up more our service industries to the possibility of stabilizing migrants and their conditions here in Macau. We cannot just import workers one year and then lay them off the next. I think we have to think long term in this aspect. Now, there's a lot of social issues involved whenever we talk about importing a huge number of manpower. But we decided on this more than 10 years ago when we developed the new vision for Macau to become the Las Vegas of Asia, or to become the next global center for tourism and leisure. So I think it's a path that we cannot go back anymore or return to, but we need to improve the next steps.
And with this note, we wrap up our talk. For sure, we'll have some other chance of interacting, exchanging, and perhaps looking into some of these tourism satisfaction sectors, which for the time being remain the intensive care unit, but who knows, maybe discharged in a few years. Thank you very much, Professor Leonardo Dioko, for joining us.
Thank you, Jose.
Pleasure to have you on the show. Fascinating talk. Thank you. And to you at home, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week.